On August 18th, 2005, at exactly 2 a.m., 5 young friends made a terrible decision that would change everything forever. They were about to enter a cave that local students had nicknamed the Cave of Death. What started as a fun night adventure would become one of Utah's most shocking cave tragedies. A similar incident happened in another tragic Nutty Putty cave, where a young man got stuck upside down in a narrow tunnel. That terrifying experience should have been a warning. But instead of staying away from dangerous caves, people decided to explore even more mysterious places. You can watch that incredible survival story on our channel. Now back into this. These 5 young friends were searching for a secret underground room that very few people had ever seen. They had no idea that something invisible and deadly was waiting for them in the darkness. The cave they were about to explore was called Gollum's Cave. It was hidden deep on Y Mountain near Provo, Utah, close to the college campus where all 5 friends were students. Most people stayed far away from this place because everyone knew it was dangerous. The locals whispered stories about strange sounds coming from inside and people who went in but came out different, scared, and confused. But inside this frightening cave was a secret room that almost nobody had ever seen. Those few brave enough to find it spoke of an amazing hidden chamber filled with beautiful rock formations. The stories made it sound like a magical underground palace waiting to be discovered. The 5 friends had been planning this adventure for weeks. They had studied maps, gathered equipment, and talked about nothing else. Tonight was finally the night they would see the legendary secret room for themselves. Marcus was the group's experienced leader. Sarah had visited this cave once before. Jake loved dangerous adventures. Emma was known for being fearless, and Tommy was the youngest and most cautious of the group. While the others got excited about dangerous adventures, Tommy always thought about what could go wrong. Tonight, his gut was telling him to stay home, but he didn't want to disappoint his friends. The 5 friends finished their dinner quickly that Friday evening. They had chosen Friday night because none of them had classes the next day, which meant they could spend as much time as they wanted exploring without worrying about getting up early. Sarah told them detailed stories about the secret cave room. She described how there was a hidden underwater tunnel that led to the most amazing chamber she had ever seen. The walls were covered with beautiful rock formations that looked like frozen waterfalls and crystal chandeliers. She said the room was big enough for all of them to stand up and walk around comfortably. The others got more and more excited as she talked. They imagined themselves as brave explorers discovering hidden treasures deep underground. Only Tommy felt a cold knot of fear growing in his stomach. Something about Sarah's story didn't feel right to him. When he asked her specific questions about the underwater tunnel, her answers were vague and uncertain. Despite his worries, Tommy didn't want to be the one to ruin everyone's excitement. They decided to leave right away while they were all feeling brave and excited. Tommy finally made the decision that probably saved his life. He told them he would drive them to the cave and wait outside while the other 4 went in to explore. He said he would be their safety person, ready to call for help if anything went wrong. His friends were disappointed that he wouldn't be coming with them on the full adventure, but they understood. They gathered their equipment quickly. Marcus brought a powerful waterproof flashlight and extra batteries. Emma packed some snacks and water bottles. Jake brought a rope in case they needed help through difficult spots. Sarah brought a backup flashlight and dry clothes to change into after getting wet in the underwater tunnel. The drive to Y Mountain took them along dark, winding roads that twisted up into the hills. At exactly midnight, they reached a small dirt parking area hidden in the forest. They had to park far from the cave entrance because the mountain roads didn't go all the way up. When they turned off the car engine, the silence was immediate and complete. Then slowly, they began to hear the sounds of the mountain forest at night. Marcus turned on his flashlight, and the bright beam cut through the darkness. But somehow, the light only made the shadows look darker and more threatening. They started walking up the steep, rocky trail that would take them to the cave entrance. The path was much harder to follow in the dark than any of them had expected. Loose rocks rolled under their feet, making them slip and stumble. After 30 minutes of difficult hiking, they finally reached the area where the cave entrance should be located. They spent 20 long minutes searching through rocks and bushes before Sarah finally spotted the cave opening. When their flashlight beams hit the entrance, it looked much smaller and more frightening than any of them had imagined. The opening was barely 3 feet high and seemed to disappear into complete blackness just a few feet inside. The sound of running water echoed up from deep inside the cave, creating an eerie, hollow noise that made them all feel uneasy. The cave entrance looked exactly like a large storm drain cut into the side of the mountain. Cold, damp air flowed out of the opening, carrying strange smells of wet rock, mud, and something else they couldn't identify. Despite the scary appearance, they had come too far to turn back now. Marcus checked their main flashlight carefully to make sure the batteries were fresh. Emma tied her long hair back in a tight ponytail. Jake rolled up his pants legs as high as they would go, preparing for the cold water he knew they would encounter inside. Tommy looked at the dark cave entrance and felt sick with worry. Everything about this place felt wrong to him, but they were already getting ready to go inside, and he knew nothing he said would change their minds. One by one, his 4 best friends disappeared into the black hole in the mountain. Tommy stood alone in the forest, listening to their voices and splashing sounds getting quieter and quieter as they crawled deeper into the cave. Soon, he could hear nothing at all except the wind in the trees and his own worried breathing. The cold water inside the cave hit them like a shock of electricity. The water was only about 6 inches deep, but it was so cold it took their breath away. Within seconds, their pants and shoes were completely soaked, and the icy water began seeping through their clothes to their skin. The tunnel floor was covered with sharp, slippery rocks that hurt their hands and knees as they crawled. Every surface was wet and slimy, making it nearly impossible to get a good grip. Their hands kept slipping, causing them to fall forward into the shallow water again and again. Sarah led the way with the main flashlight, her beam dancing wildly as she tried to crawl and hold the light steady at the same time. Marcus followed close behind her, then Jake, then Emma at the back. They had to move forward on their hands and knees because the tunnel was too low for them to walk upright. The ceiling above them was covered with some kind of gross, slimy growth that felt disgusting whenever they accidentally touched it. Water dripped constantly from above, hitting their backs and necks with freezing drops that made them shiver uncontrollably. The tunnel felt like a nightmare that went on forever. Every few feet, they had to squeeze through sections where the walls came together so tightly they could barely fit. Sharp rocks scraped their shoulders and cut their hands as they forced their way through these narrow spots. As they crawled deeper and deeper into the mountain, Marcus started feeling strange. The combination of cold water, tight spaces, and complete darkness was making him dizzy and confused. His heart was beating so fast he could hear it pounding in his ears, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep his grip on the slippery rocks. Sarah was also getting worried. The tunnel seemed much longer and more complicated than she remembered from her previous trip. Had they taken a wrong turn somewhere? The layout seemed different, but in the dark, with water everywhere and her mind full of fear, she couldn't be sure of anything. After what felt like hours of horrible crawling through the freezing, narrow tunnel, they finally reached a larger area where they could sit up straight. The relief of being able to stretch their backs and lift their heads was incredible after being hunched over for so long. But they were all in terrible shape. Their clothes were completely soaked with dirty cave water, and they were shivering so violently they could barely control their movements. Their hands and knees were cut and scraped from the sharp rocks, and the wounds burned in the contaminated water. Sarah pointed her flashlight beam toward a dark hole in the cave floor that was filled with black water. This was the underwater tunnel she had told them about, the passage that would take them to the secret room. In the weak, shaking light, the water-filled hole looked like an open grave. The underwater entrance was much more frightening than Sarah had described. The water was completely black and looked thick and oily, like it might be polluted with something dangerous. The opening was barely wide enough for one person at a time, and they could not see how deep it went or where it led. Sarah tried to sound confident and reassuring, but her voice was shaking with cold and fear. Being back in this cave was bringing back scary memories she had tried to forget. She was starting to remember feeling very sick in the hidden room during her previous visit. She remembered everyone getting bad headaches and having trouble breathing properly. Sarah handed the main flashlight to Marcus and prepared to enter the water-filled tunnel. She explained the plan to the others. She would go first and swim through the underwater passage to the secret room. They should count to 60 after she disappeared. Then Jake would follow. Emma would go next, and Marcus would come last, bringing the light with him. She told them to feel along the walls of the underwater tunnel for a rope that previous visitors had left behind. This rope was supposed to guide them safely through the dark, twisting passage to the hidden chamber where she would be waiting for them. The freezing water felt even worse than she had remembered. As her body slipped into the black tunnel, it felt like thousands of ice-cold needles were stabbing her all at once. The shock was so intense that she almost gasped underwater, which would have filled her lungs with the contaminated cave water. In the complete darkness of the underwater tunnel, she searched desperately for the rope that was supposed to guide her way. But her fingers were already too numb from the cold to feel anything properly, and she could not find the rope anywhere along the tunnel walls. Without the rope to guide her, Sarah was swimming blind through a maze of underwater passages. Her lungs started burning with the need for air, and panic began to set in. Finally, just seconds before she would have passed out from lack of oxygen, she felt the tunnel angling upward. She followed it desperately and broke through the surface into what she hoped was the secret room. But something was terribly wrong with the air in the chamber. As soon as she tried to take her first breath, she felt dizzy and sick to her stomach. The air tasted strange and metallic, like she was breathing through a dirty piece of metal. Within seconds, her head started pounding with a severe headache that felt like someone was hitting her skull with a hammer. She tried to call out to warn her friends not to come, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. With each breath she took, she felt weaker and more confused. Her vision became blurry, and her thoughts started getting mixed up and unclear. Back in the main cave, her three friends waited nervously for some kind of signal from Sarah. When several minutes passed and they heard nothing, Jake decided that everything must be going according to plan. He prepared himself for his own terrifying journey through the underwater tunnel. Jake's swim through the black water was a complete nightmare. Without any light, he couldn't see anything in the water around him. The cold attacked his muscles immediately, making them stiff and unresponsive. Like Sarah, he quickly discovered that he couldn't find the rope that was supposed to help guide him through the maze. When he finally found an air pocket and surfaced in the secret room, He was gasping and exhausted, but breathing the air in the chamber was almost as difficult as holding his breath underwater had been. Each breath felt insufficient, like the air was missing something essential that his body needed to survive. Emma prepared herself for her turn in the underwater tunnel. She was frightened, but she didn't want her friends to think she was a coward. Emma was smaller than the others, which meant the freezing water affected her much more quickly and severely. Like Jake and Sarah before her, she became lost in the underwater maze when she couldn't locate the guide rope. By the time she finally found the secret room, she could barely think clearly enough to understand where she was. When she tried to breathe the poisoned air in the chamber, she immediately felt sick and disoriented. She collapsed onto a rocky ledge, unable to process what was happening to her. Marcus waited alone in the main cave, growing more frightened with each passing minute. Finally, Marcus made the decision that he could not abandon his friends, whatever was happening to them. When he reached the secret room, he found his 3 friends in serious distress. Sarah was sitting against a wall with her head hanging down, struggling to breathe normally. Jake was lying motionless on a stone ledge, barely conscious. Emma appeared to be unconscious, slumped over on the rocks. What none of them understood was that they were being slowly poisoned by an invisible killer. Previous visitors to this sealed underground room had gradually used up most of the oxygen and replaced it with deadly carbon dioxide. Candles that other people had burned in the chamber had made the problem even worse by consuming more oxygen and producing more poisonous gases. The air in the room now contained dangerously low levels of oxygen and dangerously high levels of carbon dioxide. This invisible poison was shutting down their body's most basic functions, affecting their breathing, thinking, and muscle control. One by one, they began losing consciousness as their brains were deprived of the oxygen they needed to function. When Sarah tried to escape back through the underwater tunnel to get help, her weakened body could no longer perform the simple task of swimming 15 feet through water. Sarah made it halfway through the tunnel before her muscles gave out completely. She floated in the dark water, too weak to continue swimming but still alive. Jake followed, trying desperately to help her and to save himself. When he reached the narrow tunnel, he found Sarah blocking the passage, but she was still moving slightly. Jake tried to push past Sarah in the cramped space, but the tunnel was too narrow for 2 people. He became stuck next to her, but his heart was still beating and he was still breathing weakly. Emma came next, moving slowly because of the poisoned air. When she found both friends in the tunnel, she squeezed in with them. Marcus was the last to attempt escape. He was extremely weak, but he was still conscious and moving. When he found all 3 friends crowded into the narrow tunnel, he joined them in the confined space. Now all 4 friends were trapped together in the underwater passage, only 15 feet from safety, but too weak to complete the swim that would save their lives. Outside the cave, Tommy waited through the longest night of his life. Hours passed, and his friends had not returned. As dawn began to break over the mountain, Tommy's worry turned to panic. He knew his friends well enough to understand that they would never stay in a dangerous cave for this long without sending him some kind of message. Tommy ran down the mountain trail as fast as his legs would carry him, stumbling over rocks and branches in his desperate rush to reach a place where he could call for help. When Tommy finally connected with emergency services, he was breathing so hard he could barely speak. He managed to give them the location of the cave and explained that his 4 friends had been inside for more than 6 hours without any communication. The rescue teams loaded their trucks with specialized equipment designed for underground emergencies. They brought powerful lights, air pumps, diving gear, and medical supplies. When the rescue teams finally reached the cave site, they immediately began setting up their life-saving equipment. Their first priority was to pump fresh air into the cave system as quickly as possible. The rescuers also began pumping water out of the cave system to make it easier to navigate the tunnels. As fresh air flowed into the cave and water levels dropped, the rescue team prepared to enter the dangerous tunnels themselves. They wore full diving gear with independent air supplies and powerful waterproof lights. The first rescuer to enter the underwater tunnel immediately saw a person floating in the water ahead. Working quickly, the rescuer reached the first victim and checked for signs of life. It was Sarah, floating motionless in the cold water. Moving deeper into the narrow tunnel, the rescue team found Jake, Emma, and Marcus, all crowded together in the confined space. All 4 friends were found together in the underwater tunnel, just 15 feet from the safety of the main cave. They had been so close to escaping, but the invisible poison in the air had weakened them too much to complete the simple swim that would have saved their lives. When the last body was finally brought out of the cave, Tommy collapsed with grief. The rescue experts explained the tragic science behind what had killed Tommy's friends. The secret room had become a death trap because of the actions of previous visitors over many months and years. Each group of people who had visited the sealed chamber had used up a little more of the life-giving oxygen and added a little more deadly carbon dioxide to the air. The poisonous gas was heavier than normal air, so it settled into the lowest areas of the cave system like an invisible pool of death. When people breathe air that contains too little oxygen and too much carbon dioxide, their bodies begin shutting down within minutes. They become confused, weak, and unable to think clearly. Their muscles stop working properly, making it impossible to swim or climb to safety even over very short distances. Tommy's friends had felt these deadly effects in the secret room, but none of them understood what was happening. They thought they were just tired from the difficult journey through the cave. By the time they realized they needed to escape, their bodies were already too damaged to make the swim back to safety. After this tragedy, authorities decided to seal Gollum's cave permanently. Heavy construction equipment was brought up the mountain, and the entrance was filled completely with concrete and steel barriers. The concrete seal was not just meant to keep people out. It also served as a permanent memorial to 4 young people who died seeking adventure in a hidden chamber. This tragic story shows us that even the most exciting adventures can hide deadly dangers. Caves around the world continue to claim lives from invisible threats like poisonous gases, flash floods, and cave-ins. If this story helped you understand the real dangers that explorers face, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories about survival, tragedy, and the lessons we can learn from them. By spreading awareness about these dangers, we can help prevent future tragedies and keep other adventurers safe. Hit the bell icon to get notified when we share more incredible survival stories from around the world. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light and honor the memory of those who lost their lives seeking adventure.